Hello and welcome to another episode of the Civil War Guy. I would like to introduce you to the Battle of Corinth. Uh, and let's start with a little bit of reading to give you a bit of background before I cover my opinion on what went wrong. The appalling carnage at Pittsburgh Landing on the Tennessee awakened the North and the South to a fuller sense of the magnitude of the war. The South had suffered a double disaster, the loss of the battle and the loss of Albert Sidney Johnston. But the Federal victory was not decisive. The Union forces had found their adversaries worthy of their steel and had paid dearly for what they had won. The Confederate troops, after the Battle of Shiloh, under General Beauregard, who had assumed command of the Army of the Mississippi on the death of Johnston, had been led to the little railroad center in Mississippi, Corinth, where they were recovering their lost organization and strength. Western Tennessee and the adjoining counties of Mississippi, the territory in which the armies of the Confederacy and the Union were operating, were unfavorable to successful military movements in force. Dense forest covered the region, and the soil was marshy and soft, stretching away in gently rolling hills. The small creeks abundant about Corinth are, for the most part, sluggish and their water unfit for drinking purposes. 3 great railroad systems penetrated the region, offering an excellent and expeditious method of transportation to whichever army was in control of the strategic point on the steel highways. And this important point at the junction of 2 of the roads was Corinth, which Beauregard now occupied, and upon which the Federal authorities cast longing glances as soon as the present campaign had begun. However, it became clear to Beauregard that although his opponent did not immediately pursue, it would be impossible to hold Corinth. Soon after Shiloh, the Union army was reinforced to more than double the strength it had been before. 4 days after the battle, General H.W. Halleck arrived at the landing and took command in person. 10 days later, General John Pope, who had captured Island No. 10 on April 7th, joined his army to that at the landing, and this, with other reinforcements, raised the number to 100,000. Beauregard had been joined by Van Dorn and Sterling Price from beyond the Mississippi, but although the rolls showed now a force of over 112,000, he could not muster much more than 50,000 men at any time, and he prepared to give up Corinth whenever the great Northern Army force should move against it. About the 1st of May, the movement of the Federal host reorganized and now consisting of the Army of the Tennessee under General Thomas, the Army of the Ohio under Buell, and the Army of the Mississippi under Pope began. Grant was second in command of the whole force under Halleck. Slowly and cautiously entrenching at every night halt, Halleck moved upon Corinth, guarding always against attack. He arrived before the town on May 25th. He met with but slight resistance, but Beauregard, although he had thrown up entrenchments and was maintaining a bold front, stealthily prepared to evacuate the town and save his army. Troops provided with 3 days' cooked rations manned the trenches confronting the Federal line, waiting for the order to advance. The Confederate soldiers had no inkling of the intentions of their leader. As the days passed and the command to attack was not given, the men behind the breastworks became restless. Meanwhile, the patients in the hospitals within the town were being hurried away, and with great trainloads of stores were sent south over the Mobile and Ohio Railroad on the night of the 29th. The preparations for the evacuation of the town by the Confederates were completed. Most of the troops were withdrawn from the trenches to the railroad, and there instructed concerning that part they were to play in their strategy to deceive the Federals. Late that night, a train rolled into the station, and the Federal pickets heard a lusty cheer arise from the Confederate ranks. Other trains followed, and the sounds of exuberation increased. Word quickly spread throughout the Federal camps that heavy reinforcements had come to the Confederates. The Northerners spent the early morning hours preparing to resist the attack they expected would be made at dawn. With the coming of dawn, at break of day, the Federals waiting in battle line could see no signs of life in the pits confronting them. The pickets crept forward to investigate. A thunderous explosion shook the town. It was the destruction of the last Confederate stores. The Southerners had evacuated the village, and Corinth, with all its strategic advantage, with its command of the great railroads connecting the Mississippi Valley with the Atlantic coast and the Gulf of Mexico, fell into the hands of the North. Both of the great armies were quickly broken up. Halleck, in possession of Corinth, looked to Chattanooga as the next objective, and Buell led the Army of the Ohio back to Middle Tennessee as a preliminary move in that direction. In the midsummer, Halleck was made general-in-chief of all the northern armies and went to Washington. He left Grant in control of the West. Meantime, Beauregard was relieved of the command of the Confederate Army of the Mississippi and was handed over to General Bragg, leaving a portion of his army in Mississippi with Van Dorn and Price. Bragg began late in August his famous expedition into Kentucky, pursued by Buell with the Army of the Ohio. A part of the Federal Army of the Mississippi remained at Corinth, where there were immense military stores under the command of General William S. Rosecrans. After inflicting a defeat on Sterling Price September 19th in a severe combat at Iuka, Mississippi, Rosecrans was settled snugly at Corinth with 2 divisions and cavalry of his army and 2 divisions of the Federal Army of West Tennessee, in all about 23,000 men. Van Dorn then joined his Army of West Tennessee with Price's Corps, or Army of the West, and decided to make a desperate attempt to capture Corinth. It was a daring venture, for Corinth was well fortified, and Rosecrans' army was slightly larger than his own. The Battle of Corinth, October 3rd, 4th, 1862, does not compare in magnitude with the greatest battles of the war, but for ferocity of fighting it was not surpassed by any. Rosecrans did not believe that Van Dorn would attack him, and when the latter appeared in force in the neighborhood on October 3rd, he supposed it was only a feint, and the real object of the Confederate army was to be Jackson, about 60 miles north in Tennessee, where Grant's headquarters were, or Bolivar, Tennessee, about 40 miles northwest, where Hurlbut's division of Grant's Army of West Tennessee was at that time located. So, you see, definitely Beauregard made the mistake of handing over the town to the Union Army. Was relieved of command and was placed in the in charge of the Richmond Home Guard. Completely relieved of command after his blunder at Corinth, was placed in the command of the Richmond Home Guard. Really, that wasn't put into effect. Beauregard was sidelined for the rest of the war, basically. And from there, the war moved on into 1863, and you get to Chickamauga, Chattanooga, Gettysburg, some of the bigger battles on the East Coast, as the Union Army started in Tennessee, pushed south, and then moved east. And then, of course, you get into 1864, and then that's really when the Confederate Army really started to fall apart, was in about the middle to end of 64 was when they really fell apart. And then, of course, early 65 was when they just went, and they didn't have anything left. They had stiff resistance for 4 years, no doubt, but they didn't have the manpower, they didn't have the industry that the North had, they didn't have the economy the North had. They had some economy, but that was based on slaves. And you had the Union Army moving south and moving east, and you had contrabands or slaves that would walk off the plantations, and they were behind the Union Army. They were literally following them, viewing the Union Army as their saviors, which I guess in a sense they were. So definitely a big part of the economic blow to the Confederacy was the slaves walking off of the plantations as soon as the Union Army passed through, with little to no resistance outside of 1863. Those couple big battles, there really was no resistance. I mean, sure, in 64 there was some resistance, but not a lot. And then 65 there was some, but not a lot. About the end of 62, the beginning of 63 really started to go back up on the upswing for the Confederate Army. But you get to about June, July, August, and then they're back on the downhill slide, and then they go up, and then they go down, and then they go up, and then they go, and they hit rock bottom. So basically, if you want to be technical, Corinth was the death knell for the Confederacy. Beauregard should have known better than to give up a major railroad hub that had 3 railroads come into that town, and it was basically, outside of Atlanta, that was one of the biggest lifelines for the Confederacy. Make sure to like this video and comment on what you'd like to see or hear next. That basically just stories that I could share all day, opinions that I could give all day. I'm not sure if you're bored yet. You can comment if you're bored, I guess. Just trying to educate you guys is all. The sad thing is that many Americans don't know what actually happened during the war. I'm trying to change that a little bit. Hopefully I'm helping. I don't know. Maybe you're tuning me out. I don't know either. But hopefully I'm helping somewhat. Alright. Until next time.